Just mentioned the Bush tax cuts, and reaction is swift and strong no matter who you ask. Here's what happened when President Obama was asked today about that at the White House news conference.
I'm saying we can give those families 97% permanent tax relief. And by the way, for those who make more than $250,000, they'd still get tax relief on the first $250,000. They just wouldn't get it for income above that. Now, that seems like a common sense thing to do. And what I've got is the Republicans holding middle class tax relief hostage because they're insisting we've got to give tax relief to millionaires and billionaires.
Christian Weller is a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, and Daniel Mitchell is a senior fellow at the Cato Institute. Daniel, let me start with you and get your reaction to that and the president's claim that basically middle-class tax cuts are being held hostage by the Republicans.
Well, the Democrats completely control Congress, so that's a little bit specious on his part. But what we're really seeing is just class warfare. The president knows that his allies in Congress, Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid, are in trouble with midterm elections less than 2 months away, and he's trying to gin up the left-wing base by fanning the flames of resentment and doing the politics of hate and envy. We all know that lower tax rates, especially for investors and entrepreneurs, are good for the economy, but Obama's putting politics ahead of job creation and economic growth.
Christian, are they good for the economy? I mean, Peter Orszag, for example, who was a close economic advisor of the president, has said the Bush tax cuts for the wealthy should be extended at least for a couple of years. What do you say?
I think we can let them run out for the richest 3% without harming the economy. And they didn't do much for the economy when they were enacted, and taking them back at this point has the effect that we wouldn't deepen the deficit hole by $800 billion. And we would clearly signal a willingness on the part of policymakers to ultimately take the deficit seriously, and it wouldn't really have an effect on the economy.
Daniel's shaking his head. Daniel, do you disagree? Do you think that they did have a positive impact on the economy?
Dan will always shake his head. We've done this before. But the main point is, when these tax cuts were enacted in 2001, if you look at the data after 2001, what you see is the weakest investment performance and the weakest employment performance of any business cycle since the Great Depression. So you can't really make the claim that the tax cuts had a big effect on the economy back then, and you cannot also at this point claim that they would have an effect letting them expire at this point.
2 points, though, that I think are worth responding. Number one, I actually agree with Christian about the 2001 tax cuts because those were very Keynesian tax cuts. But in 2003, when we actually lowered marginal tax rates and reduced the double taxation on dividends and capital gains, that's when the economy picked up a little faster. Now, I also have to say that Christian, let me just say, though, your crocodile tears on the deficit don't really mean much to me. You supported the so-called stimulus that didn't work. You supported government-run health care. Why is it that deficits are only important when you don't want to have tax cuts, but when it's time for more spending, you say, go ahead, red ink until the sun doesn't shine?
A lot of red ink.
Let me respond to this, because the distinction clearly is about long-term deficits. Now, the long-term deficits actually will shrink because of health care reform, as the Congressional Budget Office has shown. The long-term deficits have no...
Do you really believe that?
The stimulus has no... Well, at this point, I have no reason not to believe it. But at this point, the stimulus has no effect on the long-term deficits. Making the tax cuts for the richest 3% of Americans permanent will have a detrimental effect on the long-term deficits, will raise interest rates, will slow economic growth, and will do very little in terms of investment or consumption this year or next year.
Christian, you've seen the CBO numbers. Long-term spending and deficits are higher as a result of Obama's cumulative policies.
We have to let that be the last word, and this is proof positive that smart people can disagree. Christian Weller, Daniel Mitchell.